In the era of $70 video games, courtesy of PlayStation, Returnal proves its worth by seizing our attention with its peculiar story and challenging roguelike trials. It's not a surprise that Sony insists on story-driven video games as part of their first-party offerings, but Returnal puts gameplay first, immersing us in an original spin on the roguelike genre with enough replay value that it sticks to landing as one of the original PS5 launch titles, living up to its name as a game to return to. Perhaps the biggest budgeted roguelike game of its kind, Returnal's production values are indicative of a game with not only flows of cash, but a stream of creativity, both in its ambiguous narrative and the refinement of roguelike elements that attempts to break the cycle of what the genre can be. Whether or not it does that may be too soon to tell, but what Returnal does do is sustain itself as a live wire act high on adrenaline with sharp, third-person shooting mechanics that test your reflexes and your ability to strategize. Roguelikes are notorious for one thing, giving you one life to beat the entire game in one sitting. Returnal is a bit nicer in that it does give you a permanent checkpoint halfway through the cycle, and a few randomized pickups can give you an extra life, but you have to be able to find them by chance in the randomized dungeons generated across 6 biomes. In a patch after launch, there's the ability to suspend cycle, allowing you to close your game and return to where you left off on your current life. The original release was lacking this feature, which would have been an arbitrary exclusion considering that many games of prior generations only lack save states due to hardware limitations. It would be obnoxious not to allow a way to save your progress after a certain level of fatigue sets in. I do concur with the general philosophy behind the roguelike genre, however, as it is one of the fundamental characteristics of video game challenges to conquer the challenge therein with as much precision and timing as possible. The other essential element in roguelikes is randomization, putting you in the thick of battle, not knowing what your surroundings, enemies, or equipment will necessarily start or end up as, forcing you to rely on instinct and intuition. Returnal is by no means the toughest roguelike out there, especially not with games such as bullets per minute in existence. Nonetheless, Returnal is still challenging within the roguelike constraints, though it is balanced by the amount of combination of weapons, suit augments, and various buffs and debuffs that change the experience every time you cycle through, some of which become permanent, while others can be unlocked by exploring the world. It's a world that is never the exact same in any 2 runs, meaning that proficiency in Returnal is not simply based on memorization, but by shrewdness. Of course, a degree of RNG is heavily influential on the experience. I found that Returnal offers more than enough resources to put the player in a position to succeed without ever feeling in an impossible to win situation or that the game was holding my hand. The game starts difficult, but only gets easier as you discover new weapons, abilities, and upgrades, as well as permanent shortcuts for future cycles. If I ever found myself stuck, I would simply backtrack to find a better weapon, a healing item, etc. that could have saved me time if I had been better prepared. Returnal's design incorporates some of the finest physics that you could ask for in a third-person shooter, with fluid camera movement and controls. There's verticality and depth to the level design, thanks to the grappling hook and dash abilities, with the dash doubling as evasion to get easy iframes, and to manage platforming and jumping sections. Each weapon has unique firing modes by default, and special abilities that can be unlocked through progressing with that weapon type. It's rare to ever get the same exact specification of a weapon twice, and no 2 weapons feel the same. Ammo is infinite, but there is a cooldown with time-sensitive reload requirements resulting in either jamming the gun or overcharging the gun to empower the next magazine. Every enemy has a certain weak point and can be staggered by building up enough successive hits, and though the enemies take your bullets, they do so without feeling too spongy. By chaining together a streak of kills uninterrupted, you gain further stat bonuses and a limited invincibility upon reaching Adrenaline level 5, Parasites give you buffs, but always at the cost of a debuff. Items in chests have random loot, but are often contaminated with a random malignancy, and there's currency to buy items that resets upon each death. All of these features form a smart system that makes each fresh cycle perhaps not endlessly replayable, but certainly worthy of more than one playthrough. The story is presented in a non-linear structure across two main acts and a secret third act, once all of the optional story sequences have been unlocked. Returnal feels like a balanced offering, both as a game that is streamlined without annoying cinematic interjections to disrupt the state of flow, and also an intriguing if not puzzlingly unsettling narrative. The story of Returnal is presented in an experimental art house sort of way, with little dialogue and lots of bizarre images and sounds. Returnal gives you a strange feeling both for what it does and doesn't do as you try to survive as the lone astronaut Celine and the emptiness of space as one of the only two characters that even speak or appear on screen. Of course, there are other characters that appear and are named, but they seem to be more like figments of Celine's cruel imagination than parts of the story, allegories of her twisted resentment and pursuit of ambition. It's an interesting concept to present a woman as the main character, at first glance a sympathetic character, who is in fact perhaps the villain all along. There aren't many games that will have you play from the bad guy's perspective, and the more we discover bits and pieces about Celine's past and identity, the less likable she becomes. Recognizing that she is a troubled character, and of course, given no other option, we do our best to help her break the cycle, but we're not sure she even wants to break the cycle. The pain hurts too much for her to want to stop. It's a weird story, fitting for the theme of a sci-fi shooter horror game. To me, clearly reminiscent of 2001: A Space Odyssey's abstract horror motifs, featuring the bleakness of space and the haunting image of the spacesuit stuck in the middle of it all. The musical score is droning without a particular theme or message. There is the famous song with its lyrics cautioning not to fear the Reaper, and an overall dark and dense cloud of Greek mythology hangs over the rest of the plot. I can spot another reference to The Shining, with the little boy being endangered by his own parent. Whatever Returnal means, it makes you think, and that's more than a lot of these other games are doing at the same time. Returnal is a good game, an 8 out of 10, showing that video games can embrace repetition without being repetitive. Replay value is so important, and I don't want to play a game that attempts to break that cycle.